Eliza Whitaker slammed $480 onto Nathaniel Caldwell's table. The coins scattered. Several rolled off the edge and struck the marble floor like accusations. Nobody moved. "I spent 20, she said. The laughter started quietly. Then it didn't. A woman behind her said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, $20. She spent $20 and calls it leadership. Nathaniel Caldwell looked at the money. Then at Eliza. "Explain yourself," he said. She didn't flinch. "Come to Willow Creek," she said. "I'll show you. If this story stays with you, subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this tale travels." The morning Eliza Whitaker walked into Caldwell Manor. She counted 3 things she did not have: gloves, a husband, an invitation. She had come anyway. The hall was full of women who belonged there, women wrapped in silk the color of wealth, women who moved through rooms like they had been built for them. Which, she supposed, they had. They spoke in the practiced half-voices of people accustomed to being listened to without raising their tone. Their perfume was expensive. Their posture was expensive. Everything about them said, "I have never once had to prove I deserve to be here." Eliza's dress was blue, plain blue, pressed as flat as an iron could get it at 5 in the morning. Her boots had been resoled twice. Her hair was pinned with 3 pins instead of the dozen she had once owned. She stood near the back, and she kept her chin up because she had learned the hard way. The only way that really teaches that the moment you let your chin drop in a room like this, you've already told everyone everything they needed to know about how much space you believe you deserve to take up. She was not going to give them that. A woman in yellow silk turned to the woman beside her. She did not bother lowering her voice. "Who invited the seamstress?" The woman beside her glanced at Eliza and then quickly away. "I have no idea," she murmured. "Charles Beaumont handled the selections." Perhaps he made an error. Eliza heard every word. She had been hearing words like those her entire adult life. At first they had felt like blows. Then they had felt like weather unpleasant, unavoidable, and ultimately not worth rearranging your entire day around. She breathed in, she breathed out. She waited. Nathaniel Caldwell entered without announcement, which told her something about him immediately. A man who needed to be announced was a man who was not yet sure the room would pay attention without prompting. Nathaniel Caldwell walked in, and the room simply shifted toward him the way iron filings shift toward a magnet, pulled by something that had nothing to do with courtesy and everything to do with gravity. He was younger than she had imagined, 38. She had been told, but he carried it differently than most men. Did not like a man settling into his power, but like a man who had been born already inside it and had spent his whole life deciding what to do with it. He was not soft. She had expected soft. Men who had never been pushed usually went soft at the edges. He had not. His jaw was set, his shoulders square, his gray eyes moving across the room with the precise, unhurried assessment of someone who had taught himself to look at things clearly, because sentimentality was an expense he could not afford. He set 12 leather pouches on the long table. The sound they made, 12 dull, heavy strikes against polished wood, brought the room to silence faster than any call to order could have. "Ladies," his voice was even. No performance in it. "Each of you was recommended to me by someone in your community whose judgment I respect. You are here because someone believed you understood people." He looked down the row of faces. "I'm going to test that belief." He opened the nearest pouch and turned it so the room could see. $500. Take this money. Go into any settlement or village on my land. Spend it however you choose. You have 30 days. He closed the pouch. At the end of 30 days, you come back here and you account for what you did with it. Every dollar. A woman near the front raised her gloved hand. "And the winner receives." "There is no prize," Nathaniel said. "The prize is knowing you did something real. If that isn't enough motivation, you're welcome to leave the money on the table and go home." Nobody left the money on the table. Charles Beaumont read the village assignments from his ledger, in the voice of a man who had long ago stopped caring whether the information he conveyed was useful to anyone other than himself. Hawkfield, Millbury, Cedar Run, Sutter's Crossing. Each name pulled a woman forward, eager, already designing her project behind her eyes. Then Beaumont reached the last name, Willow Creek, silence. The woman in yellow silk made a small sound, not quite a laugh. But adjacent to one, Willow Creek, she repeated. To no one and everyone. I've heard the road out there is nearly impassable. And the people are, she paused, difficult. Difficult, said the woman beside her. And the word sat in the air like a door being closed. Beaumont looked down at his ledger. If no one selects Willow Creek, it will simply remain unassigned, and I'll take it. The voice was Eliza's. She had not planned to speak so quickly, but something about the way that word difficult had landed made her chest tighten in a way that did not allow for patience. Every head in the room turned. Beaumont looked at her with the expression of a man who has heard an unexpected noise and is trying to determine whether it requires his attention or whether it will resolve itself if ignored. Miss, he started. Mrs. Eliza said, Whitaker. He looked at her dress, her boots, her bare hands. Mrs. Whitaker. He said it the way a man says a name when he is already moving past it. Willow Creek is quite remote. The conditions are. I heard what the conditions are, Eliza said. I'll take it. Something shifted in Beaumont's face. Not anger too controlled for that. More like the small, careful recalibration of a man filing information away for later use. He wrote her name in his ledger. Beside her, barely audible, the woman in yellow silk said to her companion, well, at least someone is willing to waste their time. The first thing Eliza did when she arrived at Willow Creek was sit downtown at the well and do nothing. She had $17 allocated in her mind before she even left Caldwell Manor. The remaining $483 she had no intention of touching until she understood something real. The well sat at the center of the settlement like a bad tooth present. Necessary, quietly causing pain that everyone had simply learned to work around. The stone rim was cracked. The rope was frayed in 2 places. When she drew a bucket, the water looked fine but smelled wrong, not dangerously wrong. Just the particular off-smell of water that has been sitting in a compromised casing too long. She sat on the rim and waited. 20 minutes passed before Pearl came. She arrived at a half-run, coat unbuttoned, one boot slightly looser than the other. Sent by someone too cautious to come themselves. She stopped 3 feet away and looked at Eliza with the frank, measuring assessment that only children and people who have nothing left to lose could manage without embarrassment. You from the manor, Pearl said. I came from the manor today, Eliza said. I don't belong to the manor. Who do you belong to? Eliza said. Not anymore. Pearl absorbed this. My papa's dead too, she said. As though this established a necessary equality between them. Something moved through Eliza's chest, quick, old. Familiar. She let it pass. I'm sorry to hear that, she said. Mama says God needed him more than we did. Pearl's tone was the particular flatness of a child who has been given an explanation they do not entirely believe but have run out of energy to argue with. I don't think that's true, but I don't say so. That's wise, Eliza said. Pearl looked at the well. Water smells bad today. How far do you walk when it smells? Pearl pointed. Past a line of bare trees, past a collapsed fence. Into a distance that looked, from here, like it asked something real of a person. Past the Hendersons, Pearl said. Past the fork where the old logging road splits. Past where my brother fell off the fence and broke his tooth, and that's real far when the bucket's heavy and you're little. Eliza looked at where Pearl was pointing for a long moment. How many days a week does it smell? Pearl thought about it. 3, sometimes 4. Eliza did the arithmetic in her head. Not in dollars. In hours. In the weight of a full bucket on a child's arms over a distance that was real far. In years multiplied by weeks multiplied by that walk. Thank you, Pearl, she said. Pearl looked at her. You ain't gonna fix it. It was not a challenge. It was a statement of experience, Eliza said. Man came from the manor 2 years ago, Pearl said. Wrote things down. Said he'd send a report. We're still waiting on the report. Eliza looked at the well. I don't write reports, she said. Thomas Reeves was 61 years old and had been born in Willow Creek and had watched every attempt at improvement arrive with fanfare and leave with excuses. And as a result, he looked at Eliza when she knocked on his door with the precise expression of a man who has heard the same song too many times to believe it will end differently. Mrs. Whitaker, he said, reading the name from the slip she handed him. Mr. Reeves, I need to know 2 things. Who can fix the well and what it costs? And who fixed the bridge last time and why it didn't hold? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened the door wider. They sat at his table, rough wood. A tin cup of coffee she drank without commenting on its strength, and he talked and she listened. Which she had noticed was already more than most people who came from the manor ever managed. Casing cracked 7-8 years ago, he said. Man came. Said not worth fixing. Recommended a new well. Nobody dug a new well. He spread his hands in the universal gesture of, and here we are. Marcus Webb, 2 settlements east. Best well man in 3 counties. He'll do it right. What does he charge? Thomas told her. She did not write it down. She held it. And the bridge? Patched wrong after the flood of 12. He shook his head slowly. Used green timber, warped, rotted. Martha Ellison broke her ankle on it. Last spring she's got 4 children and she was carrying the youngest when she went down. Eliza's jaw tightened briefly. Who in this settlement can do the work right if they have proper materials? Thomas blinked. It was apparently not a question he had been asked before. Will Hadley, he said slowly, and Joe Paris, both good with their hands. Both need the work. Would they do it for fair wages? Fair wages. He said it like the phrase was in a foreign language. Mrs. Whitaker, do you know the last time someone offered fair wages to? Would they do it? She said. A pause. Yes, he said, they'd do it. Marcus Webb came on the 4th day. He was a large, quiet man who spoke primarily in observations rather than opinions, and who assessed the well with the thoroughness of someone who understood that a wrong diagnosis cost more than a right one. He spent 40 minutes examining the casing, the rope mechanism, the ground beneath the stone rim. Then he named his price. Eliza negotiated not aggressively, not with the performance of someone who needed to be seen negotiating, but with the quiet precision of a woman who had been managing money that wasn't quite enough for a long time, and had gotten very good at making it reach exactly as far as it needed to. They settled on $17. You're good at this, Marcus said. Not unkindly. I've had practice, she said. He started work the next morning. While he worked, Will Hadley and Joe Paris laid the new bridge boards proper timber. Cut to length, fitted square, no shortcuts. Eliza watched for an hour, asked 2 questions, and then left them to it, because they knew what they were doing, and she understood that a woman who hovers communicates distrust. And distrust costs you more than money. She paid them at the end of the day. Cash in their hands, immediate. Joe Paris looked at the coins in his palm for a moment. Most people pay at the end of the job, he said. Most people can afford to wait, Eliza said. I reckon you can't. No, ma'am, he said quietly. We can't. On the 7th day she walked the whole settlement again. Not to inspect, to see what she had missed. She sat with 3 women on the porch of a house near the northern edge, and she asked the question she should have asked first and forgot to. What do you need that nobody has ever thought to ask about? The women looked at each other. Then the eldest of them, a woman named Ruth, with hands that had worked so long and hard they had permanently curled slightly inward, said, A woman who can birth babies. Proper. We lost 2 last winter and nearly lost Emma Paris in the bargain. Nearest midwife is a day and a half out. Eliza was quiet. And before you say you'll send word to the manor, Ruth said. Watching her carefully, understand that we've sent word to the manor before. The words go in and nothing comes out. I understand, Eliza said. Do you? Ruth's eyes were not unkind, but they were not soft either. They were the eyes of a woman who had measured her trust by what it had cost her. I do, Eliza said. Because I've been the person sending words into places where nothing comes out. Ruth looked at her for a long moment. Then something in her face shifted, not warmth, not yet, but the first careful crack in a wall that had been standing a long time. You lost somebody, Ruth said. It was not a question. Eliza's hands were still in her lap. My husband, she said. 3 years ago. We had a good life and then we didn't, and then I had to learn very quickly what I was made of when there was no one left to make it easier. The porch was quiet. I reckon you know, Ruth said, that what you're made of is something considerable. Eliza looked at her hands. Some days, she said. She rode back to Caldwell Manor on the 31st day with $480 in the leather pouch and the particular stillness of a woman who knows she has done something real and has no idea whether the world will recognize it. The hall was fuller than before. Word had traveled, as it always did, and there were faces she did not recognize, men. Mostly, standing along the walls, with the careful neutrality of people who are present for a specific reason they have not announced. She stood in the back and waited while the others presented. The fountain woman, the facade woman, the portrait woman who had, as promised, commissioned a painting of herself, presenting a ceremonial shovel to a man who was clearly wondering why he was holding a shovel. The hymnal woman, who spoke with great feeling about the spiritual uplift of new music. Nathaniel listened to each of them with his full, controlled attention. Then he looked at Eliza, Mrs. Whitaker. She walked forward. She set the pouch on the table. She did not slam it this time. She set it down with both hands, deliberately, like she was placing something that deserved to be placed with care. The room heard the weight of it, the difference between this pouch and the others. Nathaniel opened it. He counted. The room watched him count. He set the money down. $20, he said. From behind her, the yellow silk woman's voice. Sharp as a pin, $20. She walked into a village, spent $20, and is standing in this room calling that leadership. Laughter. Not universal, but enough. Nathaniel held up one hand. The laughter stopped. He looked at Eliza. His gray eyes were unreadable. What did you do, he said, with $20? Eliza looked back at him without moving. I fixed the well, she said. The casing had been cracked for 8 years. Women were walking 2 miles for clean water 3. 4 days a week I hired the right man. $17. The well is clean. Nathaniel said nothing. I fixed the bridge, she said. South Road. Rotten boards patched wrong after a flood 6 years ago. Woman broke her ankle on it last spring. She had 4 children, and she was carrying the youngest. I bought proper timber and paid 2 men from the settlement fair wages to lay it right. $2.70. Still nothing from Nathaniel. But she saw his jaw shift slightly. The remaining $480 are in that pouch, she said. Because I didn't find a problem that needed them. Not yet. And I will not spend money on a problem that doesn't exist so that I can stand here with empty hands in a good story. The room was very quiet. The woman in yellow silk said in the silence, a well. And a bridge. That is what she offers as proof of leadership. A well and a bridge. Tell me, Mrs. Hargrove, Nathaniel said, and his voice had changed. Something in it cooler now, more deliberate. Exactly did your fountain accomplish for the people who live in that village, Mrs. Hargrove blinked. It beautified. Did anyone ask them if they wanted a fountain? Silence. Nathaniel looked at Eliza. A well, he said. 8 years with a cracked casing. It was in none of my reports. No, Eliza said. It wouldn't be. Why not? She met his eyes. Because the people writing your reports, Mr. Caldwell, have never had to walk 2 miles for clean water. And a man who has never been thirsty doesn't think to ask where the water comes from. The room was still. Charles Beaumont, standing at Nathaniel's left, with his ledger open and his pen poised, did not write anything down. Nathaniel picked up the leather pouch. He held it. He looked at the money inside $480. Returned, intact, sitting there like an argument he could not refute. He looked at Beaumont. How many wells on my land have cracked casings? Beaumont's pen stopped moving entirely. I would need to consult the records, he said. Consult them today, Nathaniel said. He set the pouch back on the table. He looked at Eliza. Tuesday, Willow Creek, I want to see it. You'll need to ride early, Eliza said. The road is poor. Are you, she said. And the way she said it, not unkind, but precise, made several people in the room hold very still. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Not as aware as I should be, he said. Apparently, Beaumont found Nathaniel in the study that evening. The fire had burned low. Nathaniel stood at the window, not looking at anything specific. Just the kind of looking a man does when he is rearranging something inside himself and needs a direction for his eyes while he does it. She made fools of us, Beaumont said. He kept his voice measured. Collegial. One loyal man speaking frankly to another. She told the truth, Nathaniel said. She told a convenient truth, Beaumont said. One well, one bridge, and she stood in that room and made every other woman look like a decorated fool. The others spent their money generously. They worked hard. Did their projects fix anything that was broken? Beaumont paused. They invested in community spirit, Charles. Nathaniel turned from the window. His eyes were direct. Did any of them fix anything that was broken? A long silence. No, Beaumont said. He said it like a man swallowing something he had not agreed to eat. Nathaniel turned back to the window. She's nobody, Beaumont said. And this time something harder crept into the careful voice. A widow, no property, no standing, no family of consequence. She spent $20 and told a moving story, and now you're riding out to look at a well. A well, Nathaniel. She has no business being at this table. And yet, Nathaniel said quietly, she was the only person at that table today who spent my money like it mattered whose hands it passed through. Beaumont was very still. She's going to be a problem, he said. He dropped the collegial warmth from his voice. Just for a moment. Just long enough for both of them to hear what was underneath it. Nathaniel looked at him. Only if the things she finds are true, he said. Are they going to be true, Charles? Beaumont's face reorganized itself back into composed concern. I only want to protect the estate, he said. Yes, Nathaniel said. And the flatness in his voice said that he had heard those words before. Many times, from many people, and was still working out what they actually meant. She did not expect to sleep well that night. She didn't. She lay in the narrow bed in the boarding house she could barely afford and stared at the dark ceiling and went over every word she had said in that hall and every word she had not said, and then she made herself stop because there was no use in it. She had done what she had done. She had said what she had said. She had spent $20, and she had stood in a room full of silk and certainty, and she had not flinched once. Whether it mattered, whether anything would actually change, she did not know. That was the part nobody talked about. The part where you do the right thing, and then you go home alone, and you lie in the dark, and you understand, with great clarity, that doing the right thing and having it received as the right thing are two entirely different events. She thought about her husband briefly, not with grief anymore. Mostly, just with the particular ache of a habit you have broken, but your body still reaches for. He would have laughed at the portrait woman with the ceremonial shovel. He would have loved Pearl. He would have said something stupid and perfect about the whole situation that would have made everything easier to carry. She turned onto her side. Tuesday, she thought. Willow Creek. The well, the bridge. Let him come and see. Let him stand there with his reports and his ledger and his 20-year estate manager and his inheritance of certainty, and let him stand at that well and draw a bucket of clean water and look at what $17 and one conversation with the right man had fixed. After 8 years of nothing, let him see it. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time, but when she did, it was the kind of sleep that comes after a day when you have done something real and hard and true. And the body, whatever the mind thinks about it, knows the difference. Tuesday came with a cold that meant business. Eliza was already mounted and waiting at the edge of the manor drive when Nathaniel rode out. She had her coat buttoned to the chin, and her expression set to the particular neutral she wore when she was in a situation that required her to be neither warm nor cold, but simply present and clear-eyed. He pulled up beside her without a word of greeting. She respected that. Men who greeted you too warmly when they were about to ask something of you usually wanted something they hadn't earned yet. "You're on time," she said. "I told you I would be." Men of your position often mean something different by on time than the rest of us do. He looked at her. And what do men of my position mean by it? They mean within an hour. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite offense. He turned his horse toward the road. "Then let's go," he said. "Before you decide, I mean something different by that too." They rode. The road to Willow Creek was exactly as poor as she had described it. And Nathaniel felt every rut and every washout and every place where the drainage had been wrong for so long that the earth itself had given up and simply swallowed the road in sections. He rode without comment for the first mile. But she could feel him taking stock, the controlled attention of a man who is looking at something with new eyes and is not yet sure whether to be angry about what he sees or embarrassed by how long he failed to see it. "This road is in my reports," he said finally. "What does the report say?" "Seasonal deterioration. Maintenance pending assessment." "And the assessment?" He was quiet for a moment. "Pending further review." "How long has it been pending?" Another pause. "Longer this time." Eliza said nothing. She did not need to. The road said it for her every jolt. Every place where her horse had to pick its way carefully. Every section where a loaded wagon would bog to its axles in wet weather, and there'd be nothing to do but unload it by hand in the mud while the children waited and the goods spoiled. 4 years, he said again, quieter, like he was hearing it differently the second time. "The women who bring goods to market from this side of the creek," Eliza said. "They add an hour and a half to the trip when the low section floods. That happens 6-7 times a year." He did the arithmetic. She could see him doing it not in dollars, which was how she had learned most men of his position calculated things, but in something else, in cumulative hours, in years of it. "That's in none of my reports either," he said. "No," she said. "It wouldn't be." They crossed the bridge and he stopped. She had expected this. She stopped beside him and let him look. The new boards were bright against the old plank's clean-cut pine. Laid square and true, fitted without gaps, no apology in them. Will Hadley and Joe Paris had done good work. Better than good. They had done the work of men who understood that the thing they were building would be walked on by neighbors. By women with children on their hips, by old men whose balance wasn't what it had been. And they had built it accordingly. Nathaniel dismounted. He walked out onto the bridge, and he did not test it tentatively the way a man does when he expects it to fail. He walked to the center, and he stood on it, and he looked down at the creek running underneath, and then he looked back at Eliza, and she could see him working something out behind his eyes. $2.70, he said. $2.70, she confirmed. "I got a better price on the timber than I expected, and you returned the difference. It wasn't my money." He looked at the boards under his feet. "A woman broke her ankle here. Martha Ellison. She was carrying her youngest. The baby was 8 months old. She went down hard. Neighbors had to come get them both." He said nothing for a moment. "She submitted no claim to the estate," he said. "There is no record of," Eliza said. "There wouldn't be." "Why not?" She looked at him steadily. "Because people like Martha Ellison have learned, over a long time, that submitting claims to the estate is a way of spending energy you don't have on a process that doesn't produce results. So they don't submit, they just carry the baby more carefully next time. And watch where they step." Nathaniel stood on the bridge for a long moment. "That is a damning indictment," he said quietly. "It's just a fact," she said. "I don't have the energy for indictments. Facts are more useful." He looked at her. Then he walked back to his horse, remounted, and they rode on without another word about the bridge. But she noticed that he rode a little differently after that, not faster. Not slower, but with something changed in the quality of his attention. Like a man who has realized the road is telling him something and has decided, finally, to listen. Pearl found them before they reached the well. She appeared from between two houses at a flat run. Coat open despite the cold, one braid half undone. And she planted herself directly in their path, with the confidence of someone who has determined that she has the right of way and expects the horses to agree. Both horses stopped. "You came back," Pearl said to Eliza. Then she looked at Nathaniel with the frank amusement that had not softened since their first meeting. "And you brought him." "I brought myself," Nathaniel said mildly. "She just didn't stop me." Pearl looked at Eliza. "Is that true?" "Mostly," Eliza said. Pearl turned back to Nathaniel. "Do you know about the midwife?" Nathaniel blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The midwife," Pearl said. "We need one." "Ruth said so." "2 babies died last winter, and Emma Paris nearly died too, and the nearest midwife is a day and a half out, and by the time you get her here, it's usually too late." She delivered this the way she delivered most information, as plain fact. No performance, no expectation of a particular response. Just the truth placed in the air for whoever needed it. "I told Ruth that Mrs. Whitaker would fix it. Ruth said, 'Don't get your hopes up.' But I think Ruth is wrong." Nathaniel looked at Eliza. Eliza was watching Pearl with an expression she could not entirely control, something soft and careful in it. The way you look at a child who has not yet learned that the world does not always reward the habit of saying true things plainly. "I'm working on it, Pearl," she said. "That means you haven't yet," Pearl said. "That means I'm working on it," Eliza said. Pearl considered this. Then she looked at Nathaniel again. "Are you going to fix the road?" she said. "I'm looking into the road," he said. "That means you haven't yet either," Pearl said. Nathaniel opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Eliza. "She's 9, Eliza said without inflection. "She argues like a circuit court judge," he said. "She learned from people who had to get very good at making their point quickly," Eliza said. Because nobody was listening for long. The well was clean. Nathaniel drew the bucket himself. He raised it, looked at the water. Smelled it the way a man smells something when he wants to know the truth of it, and not just the appearance of it. Clear. No off note. He lowered the bucket slowly. He stood at the edge of the well for a moment, and Eliza watched him do what she had watched very few powerful men do at that moment in that particular place. He was doing the arithmetic she had done, not dollars. Not reports, not assessments pending review. He was calculating what 8 years of cracked casing meant in hours walked. In weight carried. In children who went to bed tired, in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. 8 years, he said. Marcus Webb could have fixed it in a day, Eliza said. He charged $17. He did it in 1 day and part of a second, then why he stopped. He knew why. He was a man intelligent enough to know when the answer to his own question was already visible if he was willing to look at it. Because nobody asked Marcus Webb, he said. Because nobody asked anyone, Eliza said. The report said, well condition deteriorating. Assessment pending. Marcus Webb's name is not in a report. His phone number, if he had one, would not be in a report. The names of the people who walk 2 miles to the fork road, when this well smells, those names are not in any report either. Reports are written by people who look at a settlement from outside it and write down what they can see from that distance. You can't see a cracked casing from outside it. You can't see an 8-year-old carrying a heavy bucket past a broken fence. Nathaniel said nothing. Then he turned away from the well, and he walked not anywhere specific. Just away, the way a man walks when he needs his body to be doing something, while his mind is doing something harder. Eliza waited. He came back after 2 minutes. I want to talk to people, he said. The people who live here. Not I don't want to hold a meeting. I don't want them lined up to speak to me in order. I want to just looked at her. Is that possible? Or have I used up whatever goodwill this settlement has toward the manor? Eliza looked at him for a moment. Measuring. It's possible, she said, if you can manage to stop looking like a man who's about to deliver a verdict. "I don't look you do," she said. "Your face right now says, I am gathering information so that I can decide what to do about all of this. And the people here have been decided about for a long time, and they're tired of it." He was quiet. "What should my face say instead?" "Nothing," she said. "It should say nothing. It should just be open, like a man who came to listen and hasn't decided anything yet." He looked at her. "I'm going to have to practice that," he said. "Yes," she said. "You are." Thomas Reeves opened the door and looked at the two of them on his step, Eliza, whom he had decided to cautiously trust, and the man beside her, whom he recognized the way every tenant on the Caldwell land recognized the name and the face and the weight of it, and his expression did exactly what Eliza had predicted Nathaniel's face would do in reverse. It closed, became careful, became the particular polite but armored expression of a man who has learned not to say real things to people with real power over his life. "Mr. Reeves," Nathaniel said, "I understand you've lived here 61 years. "Yes, sir," Thomas said. "I want to know what it's been like." Thomas looked at him. "Sir, what it's been like," Nathaniel said, "to live here. What works, what doesn't, what you needed that you didn't get, and what you asked for that nobody ever answered." A long silence. Thomas looked at Eliza. She gave him nothing, no encouragement, no warning. She left it with him. It was his to decide. Thomas looked back at Nathaniel. "That's a long list," he said carefully. "I've got time," Nathaniel said. Another silence. Thomas studied him the way a man studies ground before he commits his weight to it. "You'd better come in," he said. They were in Thomas's house for 45 minutes. Nathaniel did not speak much. Eliza had expected him to fill silences with solutions, to interrupt with plans, to do what men of his position almost universally did when confronted with a list of problems, which was to immediately begin cataloging how they would fix them. He did not. He sat with his hands on his knees and he listened. And the quality of his listening was different from what she had anticipated. It was not the performance of a powerful man performing attentiveness. It was actual attention. She could see it in the way his eyes moved, in the slight change of his jaw when something landed hard. Thomas talked for 40 minutes. He talked about the road that flooded, about the well that had been cracked for 8 years, about the 3 families who had left the settlement in the last decade because there was no midwife, and 2 of them had lost children and decided the risk wasn't worth staying for. About the schoolhouse. There was a schoolhouse, or there had been, but the roof had caved in 2 winters ago, and the children were being taught by a woman named Agnes in her front room, which fit 8 children if they pressed together. And there were 23 children in the settlement. He talked about the taxes. He talked about the taxes for a long time. Nathaniel went very still when Thomas talked about the taxes. "The assessment was recalculated 3 years ago," Thomas said. "Went up. Significantly. Nobody could tell us why. We sent a letter to the manor." He paused. "Mr. Beaumont wrote back and said the assessment was correct, and that any dispute should be submitted through the proper channels." Another pause. "We don't know what the proper channels are. Nobody told us. We sent another letter asking." Nathaniel's response came. On his knees, had gone flat and still. "I was not aware of that correspondence," he said. His voice was even. "No, sir," Thomas said. "I didn't think you were." They looked at each other, the 61-year-old man who had been born in this settlement, and the 38-year-old man whose name was on the deed to the land under it, and something passed between them that was not comfortable, but was real. The particular unglamorous reality of 2 men looking at a system that had failed, and knowing they are on different sides of the failure, and also both inside it. "I'm going to look at the assessment records," Nathaniel said. "Personally, not through a review, not through a report. I will look at them myself." Thomas was quiet. "You believe me or you don't," Nathaniel said. "That's fair. I haven't given you a reason to believe me yet." Thomas was quiet for another moment. "Then no," he said, "you haven't." "Then I'll give you one," Nathaniel said. and the flatness in his voice, the absence of performance, was the most convincing thing he had said all morning. They left Thomas's house and the cold air hit them, and they walked in silence for a moment before Eliza said, without preamble, the tax assessment. I know, Nathaniel said. Did you know before today? A pause. Not a guilty pause. A genuine one, the pause of a man asking himself an honest question. No, he said. I signed the new assessment schedules 3 years ago. Beaumont presented them. He said the land values had been recalculated, and that the adjustment was standard across all holdings. Was it? I don't know, he said. I'm going to find out. She looked at him sideways. What do you think you're going to find? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, I think I'm going to find that Beaumont has been managing this estate for 20 years and has made himself very useful and very comfortable. And that some of the ways he has made himself comfortable may not have served the people on this land the way they should have. Eliza said nothing. You already knew that, he said. It was not an accusation. I suspected it, she said carefully. I don't know enough to know, but you suspected it before I did. I look at things from underneath, she said. It's easier to see the cracks in the foundation from underneath. They walked a few more steps. I've been looking from above, he said, for 38 years. I know, she said. Not unkindly. Ruth was on her porch. She was the kind of woman who always seemed to know when something was coming, not through any supernatural perception, but through the long practice of a person who has spent her life watching her surroundings carefully. Because her surroundings could not always be trusted. She watched Nathaniel come up the path with the same eyes she had turned on Eliza 10 days ago, measuring. Patient, not hostile but not open either, giving nothing away until something was earned. Mr. Caldwell, she said. She knew who he was, of course she did. He started. Ruth, she said. I haven't been a missus in 12 years. Don't bother with the formality. It'll slow us down. Nathaniel blinked. Adjusted. Ruth, he said. Eliza tells me you lost 2 women last winter. Ruth's eyes moved to Eliza briefly. Then back. Babies. 2 babies. And Emma Paris nearly bled out in her own bed with no one there who knew what to do beyond pray and hold her hand. I want to establish a relationship with a midwife, Nathaniel said. Someone the settlement can call on reliably. I want it done before winter. Ruth looked at him for a long, careful moment. Why, she said. He blinked again. I beg your pardon, Ruth said. We sent word 2 years ago. 3 years ago. Before that. Why today? Because she brought you out here. She nodded toward Eliza. Because it's inconvenient for you to have dead children on your land. Because it makes the reports look bad? Eliza held herself very still. Nathaniel did not look to her for rescue. She had been watching for that, the instinct to look to the person who had vouched for him. To use her as a buffer, he did not. He kept his eyes on Ruth. Because I didn't know, he said. And that's my failure. I should have known and I didn't, and I'm not going to explain to you why that happened, or ask you to accept that it's sufficient. It isn't sufficient. But I'm here now and I'm asking what you need and I intend to provide it. And you can believe that or not, based on whether I actually follow through. Ruth studied him. Constance Webb, she said finally, over in Henderson's Crossing. She's been a midwife for 30 years. She's the best in this county. And she doesn't come out here because nobody has ever offered to pay her travel. Her husband's got a bad leg. She can't leave him for 2 days each way without someone staying with him. I'll arrange for someone to stay with her husband, Nathaniel said. And I'll pay her a retainer to be available to this settlement on short notice. Within the week. Ruth was quiet. Within the week, she repeated. Within the week, he said. A long silence. I'll believe it when Constance Webb walks through that settlement gate, Ruth said. Until then, it's just words, Nathaniel said. It is. He did not argue with her. He did not reassure her. He acknowledged the reality of what she had said and left it there. Which was, Eliza thought, exactly right. Ruth did not need reassurance. She needed proof, and he had understood that. Eliza had not expected him to understand that. They were riding back when Charles Beaumont's name came into the space between them. Eliza brought it there, not because she enjoyed it, but because it needed to be there. "The letters Thomas wrote," she said, "about the tax assessment." "Yes, and chose not to bring them to you." A pause. "That would appear to be the case. That's not the first time." "Is it," she said, "that he's filtered what reaches you?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long time. The road moved under them, still rutted, still poor. Not fixed by any conversation they'd had today, still requiring its own reckoning. "Beaumont has managed this estate since I was 18 years old," he said. "He was my father's man before he was mine. He is efficient. Organized. The systems he has built he stopped. They are very good systems for producing reports. I am beginning to wonder if they are equally good systems for concealing what the reports don't say." "That's a generous way to describe it," Eliza said. "What would you call it?" She thought for a moment. "I'd call it a man who has made himself necessary by making sure that the person who pays him never sees clearly enough to know he doesn't need him." Nathaniel looked at her. "That's direct," he said. "You said you don't get enough truth," she said. "I'm not going to ration it now." He held her gaze for a moment, then looked back at the road. "No," he said quietly. "Don't." They were 2 miles from the manor when it started to rain. Not the polite, apologetic kind of rain that lets you pretend it isn't happening the flat. Cold, deliberate kind that means it and says so clearly. Eliza pulled her collar up. Nathaniel said nothing, and she did not expect him to. They rode in the rain without hurrying, because hurrying wouldn't get them there dry and would only make the horses miserable. And neither of them was the kind of person who sacrificed practicality for pride. "The schoolhouse," he said out of nowhere. The roof caved 2 winters ago. 23 children being taught in someone's front room." "Agnes Moore," Eliza said. "She used to teach in the schoolhouse. After the roof went, she took them into her home, because what else was she going to do? She hasn't been paid in 8 months because the payment came through the manor's education fund, and the fund is disbursed by Beaumont," he said. "Yes." He said a word under his breath that was not appropriate for polite company. Eliza pretended not to hear it, which she thought was the courteous response. "The roof," he said, "and Agnes Moore's back wages. That's what I'd start with. I'm going to need someone to show me what else I'm missing," he said. "In this settlement and the others. Someone who can go where I can't go the way I can't go there." She was very careful here, because she could see where this was heading, and she needed to understand what he meant by it before she agreed to anything. "What are you asking me, Mr. Caldwell?" He looked at her through the rain. "I'm asking you to help me see what I've been missing. To go into the settlements the way you went into Willow Creek. Not to perform leadership to find what's actually broken. And then what?" she said. "I bring you a list and you hand it to Beaumont, and Beaumont does what he has always done with lists that inconvenience him." Nathaniel was very still. "Beaumont," he said carefully, "is going to be managed differently going forward." "That's a careful way of saying it," she said. "I am being careful," he said, "because I am still working out the shape of what needs to change, and I don't want to make you promises I'm still learning how to keep." Eliza looked at him through the rain. "A man who tells you he doesn't want to make promises he doesn't know how to keep yet is either very honest or very practiced at the performance of honesty." And in her experience, the difference was nearly impossible to identify from a distance. You had to watch what they did next. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's enough," he said. They rode the last 2 miles in silence, and the rain came down steady and cold around them. And Eliza thought about Thomas Reeves's face when Nathaniel said, "I'll give you a reason." She thought about Ruth saying, "I'll believe it when Constance Webb walks through that gate." She thought about Pearl standing in the road with her coat open and her braid half undone, asking without any softness or ceremony whether the road was going to be fixed. She thought about all the women who had walked 2 miles to the fork road with a bucket that weighed more than it should, over a road that had been pending assessment for 4 years. to a creek that was passable except when it wasn't. She thought about what it would mean to go into the other settlements, to ask the questions that weren't on the forms, to find the things the reports couldn't see. She thought about the risk of it, of making herself useful to a man whose goodwill she could not guarantee, in a system that was run by a man who had already looked at her with the eyes of someone filing her away as a future problem. And she thought, with the kind of clarity that cold rain sometimes produces, that the risk of not doing it was the same risk she had been living with for 3 years since her husband died and the world had rearranged itself, and she had learned what she was made of when no one was there to make it easier. The risk of sitting still while things stayed broken. She could not do that. She had never been able to do that. It was the one thing about herself she had no plan to change. Nathaniel was unsaddling his horse when Beaumont appeared. He had been waiting. Eliza could see it in the way he stood slightly too still. The way a man stands when he has been rehearsing a conversation. "How was Willow Creek?" "Bone formative," Nathaniel said. Without turning. "I've pulled the well reports," Beaumont said. "As you asked. There are 11 settlements with wells that are flagged for assessment in the current cycle." 11, Nathaniel said. He turned now, looked at Beaumont. "Yes, all are scheduled for review in the spring maintenance. How long have they been flagged?" Beaumont opened his ledger. "This cycle began before this cycle," Nathaniel said. "How long have these 11 wells had problems?" A pause. "I would need to cross-reference the historical." "Cross-reference it tonight," Nathaniel said. "And pull the tax assessment records for Willow Creek. All correspondence received from Thomas Reeves or any resident there over the past 4 years. Every letter, every submission." Beaumont's face did not change. Not visibly, but something behind it shifted a small, quick recalibration. "Of course," he said. "Is there something specific that's pull the records?" Nathaniel said. "We'll talk tomorrow morning." Beaumont's eyes moved briefly to Eliza. Just briefly. And in that brief movement was everything she needed to know about what was coming. He was not afraid of Nathaniel asking questions. He was afraid of Nathaniel asking the right questions. And he had just understood, in the particular way that intelligent and dangerous men understand things, that Eliza Whitaker was the reason Nathaniel Caldwell now knew which questions were the right ones. He smiled at her. It was the most frightening thing that had happened all day. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said pleasantly. "I hope the ride was not too taxing." "Not at all," she said. "Good," he said. "Do take care on that road. It can be quite treacherous in the rain." He walked away. Eliza stood in the rain and watched him go and understood with absolute clarity that the easy part was over. The records arrived on Nathaniel's desk at 7 in the morning. Beaumont had pulled them. Every folder, every ledger page. Every correspondence file stacked in neat organized rows the way Beaumont did everything. With the particular precision of a man who understood that presentation was its own form of argument. The message in the neatness was clear: I have nothing to hide. Look at how organized I am. Look at how cooperative. Nathaniel looked at the stack for a long moment before he touched it. Then he sat down and he started at the beginning. He read for 3 hours without stopping. By the end of the first hour, he had found 2 letters from Thomas Reeves, both written in the careful, slightly formal hand of a man who did not write letters often, but understood that the written word carried more weight than a spoken complaint. Both regarding the tax reassessment of $1,815. Both asking, politely but directly, why the assessment had increased by 31% without explanation, and whether there was a process for review. Beaumont's response to the first letter was filed beside it. Polished, bureaucratic. The assessment is correct. All appropriate channels are available. Please submit any formal dispute through the estate office. There was no response to the second letter. By the end of the second hour, Nathaniel had found the original assessment calculation. He was not a man who frightened easily, and he was not a man who made accusations without evidence. But what he found in that calculation sat in his chest like a coal that had been burning quietly for longer than anyone had told him. The land values had been recalculated using a methodology that Beaumont had developed and presented to him in a summary document 3 years ago. Nathaniel had signed the summary. He had not read the underlying methodology, because Beaumont had been managing these calculations for 20 years, and Nathaniel had trusted the summary the way you trust the floor under your feet without checking whether the boards were sound. The methodology was not fraudulent. It was something more insidious than fraud. It was a series of small defensible adjustments, each one reasonable in isolation, each one producing a number slightly higher than the last, compounding across 11 settlements over 3 assessment cycles into something that, taken as a whole and compared against any independent valuation, looked very different from standard. By the end of the 3rd hour, Nathaniel had found Agnes Moore's payment files, 8 months of wages, held in the Education Fund disbursement queue, marked as pending verification of teaching credentials, a verification that had apparently been requested by the estate office and never followed up on, leaving the payment suspended in a bureaucratic limbo that required only one signature from one person to resolve. That person was Charles Beaumont. Nathaniel closed the last folder. He sat very still. Then he sent for Eliza. She arrived in 20 minutes, which told him she had not gone far after yesterday. She came in without ceremony, looked at the stack of folders on his desk, looked at his face, and sat down in the chair across from him, without waiting to be asked. "Tell me what you found," she said. He told her. She listened the way she always listened, fully, without interrupting, without the performance of reaction. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Agnes Moore," she said first. "Yes, 8 months. Yes, 1 signature, yes." Eliza was very still. "That woman has been teaching 23 children in her front room for 8 months without pay, because Charles Beaumont did not sign a piece of paper, yes. And the tax reassessment. I cannot call it fraud," Nathaniel said carefully. "Not yet, not without an independent review. But it is irregular, in ways that consistently benefit one outcome." Which outcome? He met her eyes. "Higher revenue from the settlements, which flows through the estate management fund, which Beaumont administers." The silence that followed was the particular silence of 2 people who have just named something real. "How long has this been going on?" Eliza said. "I don't know yet," he said. "But the pattern in these files goes back at least 6 years. Eliza looked at her hands, then back at him. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to bring in an independent assessor," he said. "Someone with no connection to this estate or to Beaumont. I want every holding reviewed, every settlement, every tax record for the past decade." "Beaumont will fight it," she said. "I expect he will. He'll say you're overreacting to one woman's story about a well." "Let him say it," Nathaniel said. "The records will say something different." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're certain?" "I'm certain enough," he said. "Are you?" She thought about Thomas Reeves's face, about Ruth's eyes, about the weight of a bucket on a child's arms over a road that had been pending assessment for 4 years. "Yes," she said, "I'm certain enough. Beaumont came at 10. He knocked, entered, and took in the open folders on the desk, and Eliza sitting across from Nathaniel, with the quick, controlled assessment of a man who has walked into a room and immediately understood its geometry. His face gave away nothing. "You asked to see me," he said pleasantly. "Sit down, Charles," Nathaniel said. Beaumont sat. He folded his hands on his knee with the composure of a man who has been in difficult rooms before and has always come out of them intact. "The letters from Thomas Reeves," Nathaniel said, "regarding the 1815 assessment." "Yes," Beaumont said. "I recall the correspondence." "You recall it," Nathaniel said. "You didn't bring it to me." "The matter was resolved through the standard process," Beaumont said. "I didn't want to burden you with routine correspondence that—" "He wrote twice," Nathaniel said. "You answered once. The second letter has no response." A brief pause. "It's possible it was overlooked in Agnes Moore's wages," Nathaniel said. Beaumont's composure adjusted, almost imperceptibly. But Eliza saw it. The verification of credentials is a standard requirement for. You requested the verification, Nathaniel said. 8 months ago. You did not follow up. The payment has been sitting in your queue for 8 months, requiring one signature. Administrative oversight. Sign it today, Nathaniel said. With 8 months of back wages included, Beaumont looked at Eliza. It was the first time he had acknowledged her presence in the room. He did it with a smile that did not reach anywhere near his eyes. Mrs. Whitaker has been very thorough, he said, in her accounting of the estate's shortcomings. Mrs. Whitaker showed me a well and a bridge, Nathaniel said. The files showed me the rest. Beaumont turned back to Nathaniel. The smile stayed in place. I have managed this estate faithfully for 20 years, he said. I would hate for a series of administrative oversights to be interpreted as, I'm bringing in an independent assessor, Nathaniel said. To review all holdings, all tax records, the last 10 years, the smile did not leave Beaumont's face. It simply changed quality, became something harder underneath the surface pleasantness. Like a pretty glaze over stone. That seems excessive, he said carefully. For what amounts to? I decide what's excessive, Nathaniel said. On my land. The assessor starts Monday. A silence. Of course, Beaumont said. He smoothed his coat. He was the picture of cooperative deference. I'll prepare the records for review. He looked at Eliza one more time before he left. Not at Nathaniel, at Eliza. Good day, Mrs. Whitaker, he said. She held his gaze. Good day, Mr. Beaumont, he left. The door closed. Eliza breathed out slowly. He's going to move the records, she said. Nathaniel was already on his feet. I know, he said. I locked the archive room this morning before I sent for you. The key is here. He touched his coat pocket. He's been trying to get in since 8 o'clock. My housekeeper counted 3 attempts. Eliza looked at him. You anticipated that. I read the files for 3 hours, he said. By the second hour, I knew exactly what kind of man I was looking at. She was quiet for a moment. You've known him 20 years. I've trusted him 20 years, he said. That's different. He picked up his coat from the chair. Come with me. I want to go to Cedar Run today. I want to start before he finds another way to slow this down. Cedar Run was a 2-hour ride, and they made it in hard silence, not uncomfortable, but purposeful, the silence of two people who have understood that time is now a factor. What they found in Cedar Run was not a well. It was a man named Henry Graves, 54 years old, who had been farming the same acreage on Caldwell land for 19 years, and who came to the door of his house with the careful stillness of a man who has learned that visitors from the manor rarely brought anything he wanted. He looked at Nathaniel, he looked at Eliza. He made his calculation. Mr. Caldwell, he said. Mr. Graves, Nathaniel said. I'd like to talk. They sat at Henry's table, and Henry's wife, Clara, brought coffee without being asked and stood in the doorway of the next room in a way that meant she was listening, but had decided not to be present for whatever this was. Your lease, Nathaniel said. It's up for renewal in the spring. Henry's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes. Beaumont sent you a renewal offer last month. He did. What were the terms? Henry looked at him steadily. 15% increase, new restriction clauses, and a provision that any improvements made to the land in the past 5 years become estate property at renewal. Eliza went very still. Nathaniel said nothing for a moment. Say that last part again. Improvements become estate property, Henry said. The barn I built 3 years ago. The drainage channels I dug myself. The new fencing. He spread his hands on the table. All of it reverts to the estate at renewal. I sign the new lease. I lose the work I've done. I don't sign. I lose the land. Did you submit any objection to these terms? Henry looked at him with the eyes of a man who has been disappointed in so many direction that he has stopped looking that way. I wrote a letter, he said, to the estate office. And Mr. Beaumont wrote back, Henry said. He said the terms were standard. He said I was welcome to seek alternative accommodation if the terms were unsatisfactory. The kitchen was very quiet. Clara came in from the doorway. She didn't ask permission. She sat down beside her husband, and she looked at Nathaniel with the direct, unadorned eyes of a woman who has nothing left to protect except the truth. "We built that barn ourselves," she said. "Henry and our boys. 3 summers of work. Our oldest broke his arm the second summer. Fell from the frame. We kept working." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "That barn is ours. I don't care what a piece of paper says." Nathaniel looked at her. Then at Henry, then at his own hands on the table. "The lease renewal terms," he said, "were not drafted by me. I did not review them. I was not aware of the improvement clause." He paused. "I am telling you that so that you understand I'm not here to defend what's in that document. I'm here because I'm finding out one conversation at a time what has been done in my name that I didn't know about." Henry studied him. "That barn," Nathaniel said, "is yours, whatever any renewal document says. I'm telling you that now, and I will put it in writing before the week is out." A long silence. Henry and Clara looked at each other, the look of a couple that has been talking about this at night. In the dark, after the children are asleep, working through the same fear from different angles, trying to find a footing on ground that kept shifting. "You understand," Henry said slowly, "that people like us have been told things before." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "I understand that. And that being told something and having it be true are 2 different things." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "I understand that too." "Then you'll understand," Henry said. "Why, I'm going to wait and see." "That's fair," Nathaniel said. "That's exactly fair." They rode to 2 more settlements that afternoon. Millbury, where the schoolmaster had not been replaced after the last one left 18 months ago, and the children were simply not being schooled. Harrow's Bend, where a family named Sutton had been paying a water usage fee for 3 years. On a creek that ran through land, they worked a fee that appeared in Beaumont's records, but not in any official estate fee schedule. With each stop, Eliza watched Nathaniel's face change. Not dramatically. He was not the kind of man who changed dramatically. But there was a progressive tightening in him, a compression of something that had started out unexamined, and was becoming, through the accumulation of Henry Graves's barn and Agnes Moore's unpaid wages, and Martha Ellison's broken ankle and the Suttons' fraudulent water fee, something with very hard edges. He was getting angry. Not the hot, combustible anger of a man who has been embarrassed. The cold, clarifying anger of a man who has been made to understand that his name has been used for years to do things he would not have permitted. That kind of anger, Eliza knew, was far more dangerous and far more useful. "How did Nathaniel?" said. "On the road back." Not a real question, more like a man talking through something with himself. "Carefully," she said. "A little at a time. Nothing that was obviously wrong in isolation. Lease clauses that were unusual but not technically illegal. Fee structures that were irregular but defensible. Tax assessments that were aggressive but within a range he could justify." She paused. "He's been very good at staying just inside the line of what you'd tolerate if you looked directly at it. Because he knew I wouldn't look directly at it. Because he made sure you wouldn't need to," she said. "He managed it all so smoothly that looking directly at it would have felt like distrust. Like ingratitude. Like questioning a man who had served this estate faithfully for 20 years. Nathaniel was quiet. "I distrust him now," he said. "Yes," she said. "Don't," she said. He looked at her. "Don't do that," she said. "What you should have done before doesn't help anyone today. What you do tomorrow does." He held her gaze for a moment, then looked forward. "You're a very practical woman," he said. "I've had to be," she said. They were back at the manor by late afternoon, and Nathaniel went directly to the archive room, key in hand, personally, and stood outside it, while his housekeeper confirmed that the lock had been tested 3 more times since morning. He unlocked it himself. He went in. He came out 10 minutes later with a specific set of folders under his arm and the expression of a man who has verified what he suspected and is now absolutely certain of the shape of the problem in front of him. He sent 3 letters that evening. One to an independent assessor in Richmond, a man he had met twice and trusted absolutely because they had no financial relationship and no history of mutual obligation. One to the circuit court in the county seat, requesting a confidential consultation with a clerk of records regarding estate documentation procedures. And one short, handwritten, delivered by his own man and not through the estate's normal courier system to Eliza. At the boarding house where she stayed, it said, "Tomorrow. Harrow's Bend first. I found something in the Sutton file. Bring your notebook, N.C. Eliza read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her coat pocket and sat with it for a while. He trusted her. That was clear. He was moving quickly, carefully, and he was including her in the movement not as a figure of community goodwill to be deployed when needed, but as someone whose judgment he was actually relying on. She was not sure yet whether that was the right thing to trust. Beaumont was at her door at 9 o'clock that night. She opened it, and he was standing in the lamplight with his hat in his hands, and his face arranged into an expression of collegial concern, so well constructed that if she hadn't known what she knew, she might have believed it. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "You are," she said. "But go ahead." He did not flinch. "I wanted to speak with you directly." "Woman to well." He smiled slightly. "I think there may be a misunderstanding developing that could harm a great many people unnecessarily." "What misunderstanding is that, Mr.?" "Caldwell is a good man," Beaumont said. "A very good man. But he is responsive to emotion, particularly to the accounts of suffering given by people who have learned that suffering, told persuasively, opens doors that facts alone cannot." He paused. "I am not saying the people in these settlements haven't struggled. I'm saying that what you've described to him represents a very partial picture, and that a very partial picture, acted on quickly, could destabilize an estate that 300 families depend on." Eliza looked at him. "Which part of Agnes Moore's 8 months of unpaid wages is partial? An administrative oversight. Which part of a lease clause that seizes a family's 3 years of labor is partial? Standard risk management in. Which part of a tax reassessment that generated irregular revenue flowing through your fund is partial?" Mr. Beaumont, he was very still. The collegial concern did not leave his face. But something hardened beneath it, something that stopped pretending. "You are a widow," he said. "No standing. No family of consequence in this county. Whatever goodwill you have managed to generate in the past few weeks rests entirely on Mr. Caldwell's current interest in your perspective." He paused. "Interests change. Perspectives shift. Men of his position have short attention spans for causes, however compelling, and long memories for people who cause them embarrassment and difficulty." Eliza looked at him for a long moment. "Are you threatening me?" she said. "I am advising you," he said. Collegially. "I don't need your advice," she said. "And I notice you didn't answer any of my questions." He looked at her, and in the look was something that had finally stopped for me, just for a second. Just long enough to be real. "Be careful," he said. "That's all. Good night, Mr. Beaumont," she said. She closed the door. She stood behind it for a moment, her hand still on the latch. Her heart was beating faster than she would have liked. She was not going to pretend otherwise, even to herself. He was not a man to dismiss. He was careful and calculating, and he had just been unambiguous about what he was willing to do to protect what he had built. She was one woman with a notebook and no property and no standing. He was 20 years of indispensability. She went to her desk and she wrote Nathaniel a second note. "Beaumont came to my room tonight. You should know." He wasn't subtle about what he was implying. "I don't scare easily, but you should know the shape of what he's willing to do. E.W." She sent it with the landlady's boy. Then she sat back down and made herself breathe evenly and thought about Thomas Reeves and Henry and Clara and Ruth and Pearl and the weight of a bucket over a long road. She was not going to be advised. Nathaniel's response arrived before midnight. 4 words: "Lock your door tonight," and beneath that, "In the same hand, I am sorry he came to you. That will not happen again." N.C. Eliza stared at the note for a long time, the formality of it. The brevity. The way Ian did not explain what he meant by that will not happen again, whether he meant Beaumont's access to her, or Beaumont's position, or something else entirely. She locked her door. She did not sleep for a long time. But when she lay in the dark and listened to the night settle around her, she found something unexpected in herself, not fear. Fear had been there earlier, had been honest about it, had felt it, had let it pass. What was here now was different. It was the particular feeling of a woman who has put her weight on a plank of wood and felt it hold. The next morning, Nathaniel dismissed Charles Beaumont. Not quietly, not privately. He called him into the main hall where the housekeeper and 2 of the estate's senior staff were present, not cruelly, not as a performance of power, but because he understood that what had been done in this estate had been done in the shadows of private offices and unanswered correspondence. And he was not willing to let the ending of it happen in shadows too. Beaumont stood very straight. You cannot prove he started. I'm not making a legal accusation today, Nathaniel said. I'm relieving you of your position. The independent assessor will determine what legal questions follow. You will leave the estate records intact. You will not contact any tenant, any resident of any settlement, or Mrs. Whitaker. You will vacate your office by this afternoon. 20 years, Beaumont said. And for the first time the composure cracked just at the edges. 20 years of faithful service to this estate, and you're going to take the word of a woman who spent $20 on a well. I'm taking the word of the records, Nathaniel said. Which you kept very neatly. That was your mistake. Everything is there. It was just organized so that it would never all be looked at in the same room at the same time. He paused. I looked at it all. At the same time. Beaumont looked at him. Something moved through his face, not quite shame, not quite anger. The expression of a man who has just understood exactly where he miscalculated. She showed you how, he said, quietly, almost to himself. She showed me what questions to ask, Nathaniel said. I looked at what the answers were. Beaumont put on his hat. He straightened it with the precise habitual care of a man performing dignity when dignity is all he has left. He walked to the door. At the threshold he stopped. He did not turn. She'll cost you, he said. People who make you see what you don't want to see always cost you. Yes, Nathaniel said. I expect she will. The hall was very still. The housekeeper, Mrs. Garrett, 60 years old, 30 of them in this house, looked at Nathaniel with an expression he could not read. Then she said, very quietly, he was taking a percentage. Nathaniel looked at her. Of what? The tax surplus, the improvement reversions, the undispersed education funds. She folded her hands at her waist. I didn't have documents. I had instincts. I should have. You're telling me now, Nathaniel said. Yes, sir. Thank you, he said. That matters. She nodded once. Then she went back to whatever she had been doing, with the composure of a woman who has waited a long time to say a true thing to the right person and has finally had the opportunity. Eliza found out what had happened from the note Nathaniel sent her at noon. She read it standing in the road outside the boarding house. The November air cold and clear around her, and she read it twice the way she always read things that mattered. Then she folded it and stood still for a moment and let herself feel whatever it was. She felt relief. Yes, and something more complicated than relief. The particular feeling of a thing you fought for arriving, and the understanding that arriving is not the same as finished. Because Beaumont was gone, but the damage was not. The wells were not fixed. Agnes Moore was not paid, not yet. Henry Graves's barn was not formally his, not yet. The road to Willow Creek was still rutted and poor. The schoolhouse roof was still caved. Constance Webb had not yet walked through the settlement gate. And until she did, Ruth was right not to believe. There was a great deal of not yet. She put the note in her pocket and she started walking toward the manor. Because Nathaniel Caldwell had just done something real. And real things deserved to be built on. And she was... Whatever else could be said about her, a woman who knew how to build. Agnes Moore was paid on a Wednesday. Nathaniel rode to Willow Creek himself to deliver it. Not through a courier, not through the estate office. He rode out with the back wages in a sealed envelope, and he handed it to Agnes at the door of her front room, where 23 children sat, pressed together on borrowed chairs and the floor and 2 upturned crates. And Agnes took it with both hands and did not open it immediately and did not cry, which Eliza, who had ridden out with him, respected enormously. Agnes looked at the envelope for a moment. Then she looked at Nathaniel. 8 months, she said. Yes. He said, I'm sorry. Are you going to fix the roof? Crew starts Thursday. Agnes looked at him for another long moment, with the eyes of a woman who has been a schoolteacher, long enough to know exactly when someone is telling her the truth and when they are telling her what she wants to hear. All right, she said. She stepped back. Would you like to come in? It's crowded. I won't impose, he said. Agnes almost smiled. Yes, she said. I do. She went back inside. The door closed, and through it, almost immediately, came the sound of a room full of children resuming the particular controlled chaos of learning questions. The scratch of chalk, a small argument in the back, quickly settled. Nathaniel stood there for a moment, listening. 23 children, he said quietly. In a room that fits 8, 10 if they press together, Eliza said. He said nothing. He did not need to. She could see it settling into him, not with guilt, because guilt was too self-regarding to be useful, but with the weight of a man who has added one more true thing to the list of true things he now carries, and is learning to walk steadily under the load. Constance Webb arrives Friday, he said. I've arranged for her husband's care. She'll be in the settlement every Thursday and on call for emergencies within a half-day's ride. Ruth will want to hear that directly from Constance, Eliza said. I know, he said. I'm bringing them to meet each other Friday morning. Ruth, Constance, and whoever else Ruth decides should be in the room. Eliza looked at him. You've thought about this. I've thought about a lot of things, he said. I have better questions now. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked away, because there was something in the way he said it simply, without expectation of praise, that she was not quite ready to look at directly. The independent assessor arrived from Richmond on Monday. His name was Edmund Farr. He was 56 and had the particular energy of a man who genuinely enjoyed finding things that had been incorrectly filed, which made him exactly the right person for what lay ahead. He spent the first day alone in the archive room with the locked files and came out at the end of it looking the way a man looks when he has found more than he expected. 6 years, he told Nathaniel, at minimum. Possibly longer, but the records before 6 years ago were reorganized. I'll need another week to reconstruct the original structure. Reorganized when? Nathaniel said. Farr looked at him. Shortly after Mr. Beaumont took over sole management of the estate finances. Following your father's death. The room went very quiet. Nathaniel sat with that for a moment. His father had trusted Beaumont, had brought him in, had built the systems with him, had, as far as Nathaniel had always understood, left the estate in reliable hands. The possibility that the reorganization of the records had happened precisely at the moment of transition, when no one was watching carefully enough to see what was being moved, was not a comfortable thing to sit with. How much? Nathaniel said. I can't give you a number yet, Farr said carefully. But the pattern is consistent across all 11 settlement assessments. And the education fund disbursements show a gap between what was received and what was paid out, that is. He paused. How significant? Farr told him. Nathaniel was very still. That's what Agnes Moore was paid from, he said. Among others, Farr said. And the rest of it went into an account, Farr said, held in the name of a land management company registered in Fredericksburg. I'll need to trace the ownership, but the account was opened 6 years ago, and the signatory listed is... He checked his notes. C.H. stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room and his hands at his sides, and Eliza sitting in the corner, where she had been taking her own notes, watched him and said nothing. He needed a moment. She understood that. A man discovering that someone he had trusted since he was 18 years old had been quietly stealing from the people on his land for the better part of a decade was entitled to a moment. He took it, then he turned back. "I want the circuit court clerk contacted today," he said. "Not a letter. I want someone to ride there in person." "Already arranged," Eliza said quietly. He looked at her. "I sent the message this morning," she said. "I thought this was likely where the records would lead." "I hope that wasn't overstepping." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his face that was not quite gratitude. It was too complicated for that. Too mixed with a recognition of what it meant that she had anticipated this and acted and been right. "No," he said. "That wasn't overstepping. The news about Beaumont moved through the county the way news always moves through a county, faster than anyone planned, and with more detail than anyone officially released." By the end of the week, Nathaniel had received 4 letters from neighboring landowners. 2 expressing concern, 1 expressing cautious support, and 1 from a man named Gerald Ashworth that was carefully worded but unmistakably a warning. He brought Ashworth's letter to Eliza. She read it at his desk while he stood at the window with his coffee. The letter was 3 paragraphs of polished, elegant language that said, "At its core, one thing, Beaumont has friends. Be careful how far you take this. There are ways to handle internal estate matters quietly that protect everyone's interests, including yours." "Ashworth and Beaumont have been doing business together," Eliza said. "For 12 years, Nathaniel said. "I know." "Then this isn't concern," she said. "This is a warning dressed as advice, yes." She set the letter down. "Are you going to be careful?" He turned from the window. "Careful how?" "The way Ashworth means it," she said. "The way people usually mean it when they tell you to be careful. Careful as in quiet. Careful as in don't push too hard. Careful as in this is getting uncomfortable for people with more power than you, and perhaps you should consider the cost of continuing." He looked at her steadily. "No," he said. "I'm not going to be careful that way." She nodded. "Then you need to move faster than they expect." "I know," he said. "Which means I need you." She was very still. "I need you to go into the remaining settlements," he said. "Cedar Run, Sutter's Crossing, Millbury, the ones we haven't fully assessed yet. I need you to do what you did in Willow Creek. Talk to people. Find what's broken. Document it." He paused. "I'll give you full authority to act on what you find. Not to report back for approval, to act." Eliza did not answer immediately. He noticed. "What's wrong?" "I need to understand something," she said. "When you say you need me, are you asking me because you trust my judgment? Or because the people in those settlements trust me, and you need that trust to reach them?" The directness of it landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Nathaniel did not flinch. "Both," he said. "Is that a problem?" "It's an honest answer," she said. "I appreciate that." She paused. "But I need to know which one matters more to you. Because if it's the second one, if you need me primarily because I'm useful to you in those rooms, then I am a tool. And I have been a tool before, in other contexts, for other purposes. And I know what it does to a person to realize that's all they were." The room was very quiet. Nathaniel set down his coffee. "You are the most clear-thinking person who has walked into this estate in years," he said. "Possibly ever. The trust the settlement people have in you is real, and it matters, and yes, it is useful to me. I'm not going to pretend otherwise because pretending otherwise would be exactly the kind of dishonesty you just called out." He paused. "But if you were not useful to me at all, if you had no community trust, no access, no knowledge of these settlements, I would still want your judgment in this room. Because your judgment is better than mine. And I am," he stopped, "learning to be honest about that." Eliza looked at him for a long moment. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me," she said. "I'm practicing," he said. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. "Full authority," she said. "Not advisory, actual authority to act." "Yes. In writing." He almost smiled. You want it in writing. I've seen what happens to verbal agreements in this county, she said. He sat down and he wrote it out himself, right there. In front of her, a letter of authorization on estate stationery. Signed and dated, granting Eliza Whitaker full authority to assess and act on behalf of Caldwell Estate in all matters of settlement welfare, pending final formal appointment. He handed it to her. She carefully, every word. Pending formal appointment, she said. What does that mean? It means, he said, that I want to offer you a formal position, not advisory. Not consultative. A seat on a council I intend to establish made up of settlement representatives and an estate liaison. You would be the liaison. She looked up from the letter. I want to think about it, she said. Take your time, he said. Don't misunderstand me, she said. I'm not hesitating because I don't want to help. I'm hesitating because I need to understand what I'd be agreeing to. A formal position means formal constraints. It means I speak for the estate as much as I speak for the settlements. And there will be moments when those are not the same thing. Yes, he said. There will be, and when they're not the same thing, whose interests do I serve? He looked at her. The settlements, he said. That's the whole point. She studied him. Measuring, in the way she measured everything, not with distrust, but with the careful precision of a woman who had learned that the gap between what a person says and what they mean was often where the damage lived. I'll think about it, she said again. She put the letter in her coat pocket and she left. She went to Willow Creek, not because she needed to. She had already been there a dozen times. She went because when she was trying to think through something complicated, she found it easier to think in motion, and the road to Willow Creek was the road she knew best. She found Ruth on her porch. Constance Webb had come Friday. As promised, Ruth had met her with the careful neutrality of a woman who was reserving judgment. By the end of 2 hours, something had shifted, not warmth exactly, but recognition. Two women who knew how to do hard things looking at each other and seeing it. She'll come, Ruth had told Eliza afterward. She's real. Now Ruth looked at Eliza with the eyes that were slowly becoming less armored, not open. Not yet, but the particular tiredness of a wall that has been standing a very long time and is beginning to consider the cost of keeping itself up. He's offering you a position, Ruth said. It was not a question. How did you know? Because that's what men like him do, Ruth said. When they find something useful, they try to make it official. Put a title on it. Put it in a budget line, make it theirs. Eliza sat on the step below her. You think I shouldn't take it? I think you should understand what taking it means, Ruth said. Right now you belong to yourself. You go where you want. You say what's true. Nobody can call you to account because nobody owns your position. She paused. The moment you take a title from that man, everything you say becomes his responsibility to manage. And eventually managing you becomes easier than listening to you. Eliza was quiet. That's not, she started. It's not his intention, Ruth said. I believe he means well. I believe he's learning. But intention is not the same as outcome, and good men with power have a very particular way of absorbing the people around them without meaning to. She looked at Eliza steadily. I've watched it happen. I've watched women who were sharp and true and free become organized. Managed. Useful in the ways that were comfortable and silent in the ways that were not. The porch was quiet. Pearl appeared from somewhere behind the house and sat down on the step beside Eliza without asking and leaned slightly against her arm with the unconscious ease of a child who has decided someone is safe. Eliza looked at her. What do you think, Pearl? She said. Pearl considered this with great seriousness. I think you should do whatever lets you keep coming here, she said. Because before you came, the well smelled bad, and the bridge had rotten boards, and nobody from the manor had ever sat on Thomas Reeves's porch and listened to him for 45 minutes. She paused. So whatever you did before, keep doing that. Just maybe get paid for it. Ruth made a sound that was almost a laugh. Eliza looked at Pearl for a long moment. You're 9 years old, she said. Yes, ma'am, Pearl said. But I'm right. She went back to the manor that evening and she walked into Nathaniel's study without knocking. They had stopped knocking 3 weeks ago. Somewhere between the bridge and the archive room. Without discussing it, and she sat down across from his desk and she said, "I'll take the position." He put down his pen. "Name them." "First," she said, "the council is not advisory. It has actual decision-making authority over settlement matters. Estate funds allocated to settlements require council's approval before disbursement." Agreed. She had not expected that to come so easily. She noted it and kept going. "Second, the settlement representatives on the council are elected by the settlements themselves. Not appointed by you, chosen by the people who live there." Agreed. Third. She paused here, because this was the one that mattered most, and the one she had thought about hardest. "If the council's decision and your decision conflict, if I bring you a finding, and you choose not to act on it, I have the right to say so publicly. To document it. My authority is real or it is nothing. And if it is nothing, I will not lend it my name." He was quiet for a moment. This was the one that cost him something. She could see him working it through the implications of it. The vulnerability of it, the reality that he was agreeing to be held accountable by someone who had been given the explicit right to call him out. "Agreed," he said. She looked at him. "You didn't hesitate on the first two. No, you hesitated on the third." "Yes," he said. "Because the third one is the one that's real. The first two are structure. The third one is accountability. And accountability," he paused, "is something I have not been held to enough." "No," she said. "You haven't." "I'm agreeing to it," he said. "Not because it's comfortable. Because you're right that it's necessary." She looked at him across the desk. At the man who had walked into Willow Creek 3 weeks ago, looking at the world from above and was now, painstakingly, learning to look at it from inside. "There's a fourth condition," she said. "I thought there might be," he said. "Agnes Moore needs a proper schoolhouse," she said. "Not repaired. Built. The children deserve walls that were built for them. Not borrowed from someone's parlor. Budget for it. Real budget. This winter, so it's ready by spring." "Done," he said. Without hesitation. She nodded. "Then we have an agreement," she said. She stood and held out her hand. He stood and took it, not the way a man shakes a woman's hand when he is humoring her, but the way a man shakes the hand of someone he has just entered into a serious and mutual obligation with. Firm. Direct, equal. His hand was warm. She noticed that the way you notice something you weren't prepared to notice. She let go first. "I'll start with Sutter's Crossing Monday," she said. "I heard there's a grain dispute that's been unresolved for 2 years. I'll have the files ready," he said. "I'll look at the files," she said. "Then I'll talk to the people." "In that order, not the other way." "Yes," he said. "I know." She went to the door. "Eliza," he said. She stopped. He had not called her by her first name before. Not once in all the weeks of wells and bridges and archive rooms and hard conversations. It was so careful, so deliberate, that the simple sound of it landed differently than she expected. She turned. "Thank you," he said, "for not letting me get away with doing this wrong." She looked at him for a moment. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Wait and see if I'm right." "You're right," he said. Simply, without performance, she left. She walked down the hall of Caldwell Manor with her boots on the marble floor, and the letter of authorization in her pocket and the handshake still real in her palm. And she kept walking until she was outside in the cold air, and then she stopped. She stood still for a moment. Something had shifted tonight, and she was not entirely sure of its shape yet. She knew what had been agreed. She knew what she had demanded, and what he had given, and the terms on which the thing between them, professional, purposeful, still carefully managed, was now operating. What she was less certain about was what it meant that he had said her name like that. Quietly, without needing to, she put her hands in her coat pockets and she started walking. She was not a woman who borrowed trouble from the future. She dealt with what was in front of her, one true thing at a time. What was in front of her was Sutter's Crossing, and a grain dispute. And 20 people who had been waiting 2 years for someone to ask what actually happened. She would go Monday, she would ask. 2 days later, Beaumont's man came. Not Beaumont himself. Beaumont was gone. Had vacated the estate office as ordered, was somewhere in the county, doing whatever men do when the thing they built is being taken apart around them. But his man, a younger fellow named Driscoll, who had worked as Beaumont's personal clerk and had the particular loyalty of someone whose entire livelihood had been attached to one person's fortune, came to the estate with a sealed document and presented it to Nathaniel in the front hall. It was a letter from Gerald Ashworth, not cautious this time, not carefully worded. It was a formal notice that Ashworth and 4 other landowners were filing a complaint with the county magistrate, alleging that Nathaniel Caldwell had acted improperly in dismissing his estate manager without cause, had engaged in irregular assessment of his own holdings in a manner designed to circumvent standard county property valuation, and had appointed an unauthorized and unqualified individual to a position of financial authority over estate matters. The unauthorized and unqualified individual was Eliza. Nathaniel read the letter. He read it twice. He folded it. Then he sent for Eliza. She arrived and he handed her the letter without a word. She read it. She was very still when she finished. "Unqualified," she said. "Not anymore," he said. "I'm filing the formal paperwork today establishing the council. Your appointment will be on the official estate record before Ashworth's complaint reaches the magistrate's desk." She set the letter down. "This is going to court." "Probably," he said. "Then my name is going to be in court documents," she said. A widow with no property and no standing, named in a county magistrate proceeding as having improperly influenced an estate owner. That she paused, not a small thing. "No," he said. "It isn't." She looked at him. "Are you reconsidering?" he said. "Are you?" She thought about Ruth saying they make you useful and then they make you silent. She thought about what Beaumont had said on her doorstep. She thought about Pearl pressed against her arm, saying just maybe get paid for it. She thought about what it meant to have come this far and stop because someone with more money and more connection had filed a piece of paper. "No," she said. "I'm not reconsidering. Then we deal with Ashworth," he said. "Together," she said. The word sat in the air between them for a moment, carrying more weight than either of them acknowledged. "Together," he said. She picked up the letter. She read Ashworth's name one more time. "He made one mistake," she said. "What's that?" "He put it in writing," she said. "Every accusation, every claim, all of it in writing. Signed with his name." She set the letter down. "The independent assessor's findings are also in writing. The tax records are in writing. Agnes Moore's payment history is in writing. The lease clauses are in writing." She looked at Nathaniel. "When this goes before the magistrate, we will have documents." "What will Ashworth have?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "Character witnesses," he said. "His word and Beaumont's against mine." "And mine," she said. "Yes," he said. She met his eyes. "Then let them come," she said. That evening, Nathaniel sat at his father's desk. His desk now had been for 8 years, but he still thought of it as his father's sometimes. In the way you think of things that came to you through grief, and he looked at the portrait on the wall. His father had been painted at 50, a serious man. A man who had built something and was aware of its weight. Nathaniel had spent his life trying to be adequate to what his father had built. Maintaining it, protecting it, trusting the systems because the systems had seemed solid and the reports had seemed thorough and the man who managed them had seemed loyal. He had spent his life looking at the portrait and asking whether he was doing it right. He looked at it now. He thought he might, for the first time, actually be doing it right, not because he had been wise. Not because he had seen clearly from the beginning, but because he had met a woman at a well in Willow Creek who had looked at a cracked casing that had been cracked for 8 years and had done the one thing that changed everything. She had asked the right person the right question. He picked up his pen. He had a letter to write to the magistrate. And this time, he was going to write it himself. The magistrate's hearing was set for the 3rd Thursday of December. Eliza knew the date before Nathaniel told her because Ruth had heard it from Thomas Reeves, who had heard it from Will Hadley, whose cousin worked at the county courthouse and understood. With the instincts of a man whose people had always needed to know these things before they were officially announced. That what was coming was not just a property dispute between landowners. It was a reckoning. The word moved through the settlements, the way significant words always moved quietly at first. Then everywhere at once, carried in the spaces between other conversations. In the pauses after church, and at wells, and at the end of working days when people stood together in the cold and said what they actually meant. Ruth came to find Eliza 4 days before the hearing. She did not send Pearl. She came herself, which told Eliza everything about the weight of what she was carrying. She sat at Eliza's table in the boarding house, and she put both hands flat on the wood and she said, "Ashworth has been talking." "I know," Eliza said. "He's been saying that you manipulated Nathaniel Caldwell. That you used the settlements, used our trust, our problems, our suffering as tools to make yourself indispensable to a wealthy man." Ruth's voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. "He's saying you're the kind of woman who looks for opportunity in other people's misfortune." Eliza was very still. "And what are people saying back?" she said. Ruth looked at her. "Depends on who you ask." That landed the way it was meant to. Honest and clean and not softened. "Some of them," Eliza said quietly. "Some of them believe him." "Some of them," Ruth said. "Yes." Eliza looked at her hands on the table. She had known this was coming and understood. From the moment Ashworth's letter arrived, that the attack would not stay in legal documents. It never did. The attack always eventually found the person and tried to make the person the problem. Tried to make her motives the question instead of the facts. "Do you believe him?" Eliza said. She looked at Ruth directly when she asked it. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said, "but I'm going to tell you something true. And I need you to hear it without defending yourself." She waited. Eliza nodded. "When a woman with nothing helps people who have nothing, and a man with everything benefits from it, people are going to ask whose idea it really was. They are going to look at who came out ahead and work backward from there." Ruth's eyes were steady. "It doesn't matter that it isn't fair. It is what it is. And you need to walk into that hearing room knowing that half the people in it are going to be looking at you the way Ashworth wants them to look at you." "And the other half?" Eliza said. Ruth's mouth moved, not quite a smile, something older than a smile. "The other half," she said, "are going to be people who have clean water now." Nathaniel came to the boarding house that evening. He knocked this time. She noticed. She opened the door and he came in and he did not sit down, and she understood from the way he was standing control. But only just that something had happened. "Ashworth filed a supplemental complaint," he said. "This afternoon. He's claiming that the estate council I established is legally invalid because it was created without the approval of the county land authority. He's asking the magistrate to suspend the council's authority pending review." He paused. "Which would freeze every action we've taken. Agnes Moore's wages, the schoolhouse construction, Constance Webb's retainer. All of it." Eliza felt it hit her in the chest. "He can do that? His lawyer believes so," Nathaniel said. "My lawyer believes he's wrong, but that it will take time to establish that in front of the magistrate, and in the meantime." "In the meantime, everything stops," she said. "Everything stops," he said. She turned away. She needed a moment. She took it 5 seconds, 6, breathing steadily through the particular anger that came not from being attacked but from watching the people she cared about used as weapons in an argument about power. Agnes Moore, 23 children in a front room. The schoolhouse frame that had been going up all week. Workers hammering in the cold, the sound of it carrying across the settlement in a way that made people stop and listen with the particular attention of people hearing a promise being kept for the first time. If that stopped now, if those workers came down from that frame and packed their tools because of Gerald Ashworth's lawyer. She turned back. "What does your lawyer need?" she said. "Documentation," Nathaniel said. Evidence that the council was established in good faith, that the actions taken were legitimate responses to real documented needs, that the authority granted was appropriate and properly constituted. He met her eyes. He needs everything you have, every note, every conversation recorded, every finding from every settlement. I have all of it, she said. I know, he said. And then after a pause, there's something else. She waited. Ashworth's lawyer is going to put you on the record, he said. Not Nathaniel Caldwell, estate owner, whose reputation and standing are established. You, Eliza Whitaker, widow, no property, no formal education in estate management or law, he said it directly. The way she had always asked him to say things. They're going to try to establish that you had no legitimate qualification for the authority you were given. That giving you that authority was itself evidence of Nathaniel Caldwell's poor judgment. She looked at him. You're warning me. Yes, you're not pulling back, she said. It was not a question, but she needed to hear the answer. No, he said. I am not pulling back, even though defending me in that room means making this about me instead of about the records. Defending the council means defending the council, he said. You are the council. The records are the records. I am not going to separate those things to make the argument tidier. His voice was even. I asked you to take a position. I gave you authority in writing. I told you in front of witnesses that the council had real power. If I walk into that room and qualify any of that to protect my own standing, he paused. Then Beaumont was right about me, and I refused to let Beaumont be right about me. The boarding house was very quiet. All right, she said. Then let's win. They worked for 3 days. Eliza's notebooks covered the table, 12 of them. Filled in her careful, dense hand. Every settlement. Every conversation. Every name, every problem, every action taken, and the cost and the outcome. She had been keeping records since the first day in Willow Creek, not because she had known it would come to this, but because she was the who kept records. It was the habit of a woman who had learned that memory was unreliable, and that the only defense against a world that would prefer to forget you was documentation. Nathaniel's lawyer, a methodical man named Harris, who wore the same expression of contained intensity regardless of what he was reading, went through the notebooks with the focus of a man who understands that the case in front of him is either very strong or very weak and is trying to determine which. On the second evening he looked up and said, "These are extraordinary. They're records," Eliza said. "They are a complete documented account of systematic neglect and deliberate financial manipulation across 11 settlements over 6 years," he said. With names, dates, amounts, and corroborating testimony from the affected parties. He looked at her. "Mrs. Whitaker, where did you learn to do this?" "I managed a household for 12 years on a budget that didn't quite reach," she said. "You learned to write everything down." Harris looked at Nathaniel. Something passed between them. "They're going to argue she's unqualified," Harris said. "Let them," Nathaniel said. "The documentation she's produced is more thorough than anything in Beaumont's 20 years of official estate records," Harris said. "If they argue she's unqualified, I'm going to ask the magistrate to compare the 2 sets of records side by side." Eliza looked at the table full of notebooks. She thought about the night she had sat in that boarding house and written the first entry in the first notebook, Willow Creek. Well, 8 years. Marcus Webb, 17. And she thought about how she had not known then what it would become. She had just written it down because it was true, and it mattered, and she was not willing to let it disappear into the space where true things went when nobody wrote them. "Let's go over the tax records one more time," she said. They worked until midnight. The hearing room at the county courthouse was smaller than Eliza had expected. She had constructed it in her mind over the preceding days as something vast and cold and deliberately intimidating, all dark wood and high ceilings, designed to make ordinary people feel the weight of institutional power. What she walked into was a room of ordinary proportions with ordinary furniture and a magistrate named Colton who looked like a man who had eaten an unsatisfactory breakfast and was hoping his day would improve. It did not immediately improve. Ashworth was there with 2 lawyers and Gerald Ashworth's particular way of sitting upright. Composed, with the quiet arrogance of a man who has never lost a proceeding in this county and sees no reason today should be different. He looked at Eliza when she entered with the expression of a man looking at an inconvenience he expects to have resolved within the hour. Beside Ashworth sat Beaumont. Eliza had not known Beaumont would be there. She kept her face neutral. She held it neutral the way she had held it neutral in every room that had tried to make her flinch. Beaumont met her eyes briefly. He looked different than he had on her doorstep. Not diminished men like Beaumont did not diminish easily but recalculated. Like a man who has spent 2 weeks reorganizing his position and has decided on a new angle of approach. That, she thought, was more dangerous than the version she had already seen. Ruth was in the back of the room. She had come with Thomas Reeves and Will Hadley and Joe Paris and Martha Ellison, who walked with a slight unevenness from the ankle that had healed imperfectly from the fall on the rotten bridge boards, and Henry and Clara Graves, who had ridden 2 hours in the cold to be present. Eliza looked at them briefly when she sat down. Clara Graves nodded at her. One small firm nod. Ashworth's lawyer spoke for 40 minutes. He was skilled, Eliza would give him that. He built his argument the way a good carpenter builds a box. Every joint tight, every angle precise, the whole thing designed to contain something and keep it from getting out. His argument was that Nathaniel Caldwell, acting under the influence of a person with no legitimate standing, had made a series of unilateral decisions that disrupted established county property management practices, improperly dismissed a 20-year estate manager without cause or due process, and established a legally invalid governing body with inappropriate financial authority. He said undue influence 4 times, Eliza counted. He said legitimate qualification 6 times. He never once said the name of anyone in the back of the room. Not Agnes Moore, not Thomas Reeves, not Martha Ellison. Not a single name of a single person who had walked 2 miles for water, or taught 23 children in a borrowed parlor, or built a barn with their own hands over 3 summers, and then been told a piece of paper said it belonged to someone else. They were not in his argument. They were in the room. But they were not in his argument. Harris stood up. He had 1 notebook. He opened it to the first page and he read the first entry aloud. Willow Creek. Cracked casing repair. Cost. 17. Outcome clean water restored. Women's daily travel for water. Reduced from 2 miles to 0. He read the second entry. The bridge. Martha Ellison's name. He read 20 entries. 20 settlements. 20 problems. 20 documented responses. 20 measurable outcomes. He read them in the steady, unhurried voice of a man who understands that the most devastating thing you can do with the truth is simply say it clearly. Repeatedly, without embellishment, until the room has no choice but to hold it. Then he set the notebook down. The opposing counsel has used the phrase legitimate qualification 6 times this morning, Harris said. I would like to ask the court to consider what qualification means. Does it mean a title, a degree, a letter of appointment from an established institution? He picked up the notebook again. Or does it mean the demonstrated ability to identify what is broken, determine the most effective means of fixing it, execute that fix at the lowest possible cost, and document the outcome with complete accuracy? He looked at the magistrate. Because if it means the latter, Mrs. Whitaker is the most qualified person in this room. Ashworth's lawyer was on his feet. The witness has no formal. She's not a witness, Harris said. She's the author of this documentation, which I am now submitting as Exhibit 1 through 12. He set all 12 notebooks on the magistrate's table. The magistrate looked at them. Then he looked at Eliza. Beaumont testified for 20 minutes. He was, as always, composed, articulate, spoke about the estate's established practices, about the importance of continuity, about the disruption caused by sudden changes in management structure. He was careful never to say anything that could be directly contradicted by the documents. He spoke in the language of legitimate concern, always legitimate concern. Always for the estate, always for the county. Always framed as the measured perspective of an experienced professional rather than the self-interested testimony of a man whose financial arrangements were currently under criminal investigation by Edmund Farr in Richmond. Harris waited until he finished. Then Harris stood up and he asked one question. "Mr. Beaumont," he said, "the Willow Creek well, the one with the cracked casing. When did you become aware of the problem?" Beaumont was very still. "I would have to consult. There is a report in your own file," Harris said. "Dated 4 years ago. In your handwriting it says, 'Willow Creek well casing deterioration noted. Assessment pending.' That is your handwriting, is it not?" A pause. "Yes," Beaumont said. 4 years, Harris said. 4 years of women in that settlement walking 2 miles for clean water while the assessment remained pending. While Mrs. Whitaker's $17 repair remained unmade." He paused. "Can you explain to this court what was preventing that assessment from being completed?" The room was very quiet. Administrative Beaumont started. 4 years, Harris said again. "And let it sit." The magistrate wrote something down. Beaumont did not answer the question. He did not need to. The question had already done its work. The magistrate recessed for 1 hour. Eliza sat in the hallway with Nathaniel on one side and Harris on the other, and she did not speak, and neither did they. Which she appreciated. This was not a moment for reassurance or strategy. This was a moment for sitting in what you had done and letting it be whatever it was going to be. Ruth came out of the hearing room and walked past her and put one hand briefly on Eliza's shoulder as she went just for a second. Just the weight of it, and kept walking. It was the first time Ruth had touched her. Eliza kept her eyes forward. She breathed. She thought about the first morning at the well. Pearl's face. The sound of the water in the clean bucket. Thomas Reeves opening his door wider. Henry Graves looking at the coins in his palm. Agnes Moore taking the envelope with both hands and not opening it. She had come to Willow Creek with $500 and spent $20 and returned $480 because she had not found a problem that required more. She had not known that morning that the problem she would find would require everything else. The door opened. The magistrate ruled in 40 minutes. The counsel was valid. The appointments were proper. The estate actions taken under Eliza's authority were legitimate and would stand. Ashworth's complaint was dismissed with a notation that the filing appeared to have been made in anticipation of findings from an ongoing financial investigation and would be referred to the county attorney for review. Beaumont's face, when the magistrate said financial investigation, did something complicated that was over very quickly. Ashworth stood immediately. His lawyer put a hand on his arm. He shook it off. He looked at Nathaniel across the room with the expression of a man who is lost and knows it and is deciding what kind of man he is going to be about it. He chose badly. "You have been played," he said, directly at Nathaniel. Clear across the hearing room. By a woman with nothing. Who needed everything. And you have handed her your estate's name to use however she sees fit, and you will understand what that cost you within a year. The room was very still. Nathaniel looked at him for a long moment. "She spent $20, he said quietly. "And fixed what you and I and every person in this county, with money and standing, had walked past for 8 years without stopping. If that is being played," he paused, "then I hope she plays me for the rest of my life." Ashworth left. His lawyer followed, and the room slowly began to breathe again. Pearl was waiting outside. She had not been allowed in too young. The bailiff had said, and Pearl had accepted this with the pragmatic composure of a child who has learned to pick her battles. She was sitting on the step in the cold with her coat buttoned. For once, all the way to the top, her braid neat, her boots clean. She looked up when Eliza came out. "Did you win?" she said. "Yes," Eliza said, as though this confirmed her prior assessment. "I told Ruth Say," she said, "don't get your hopes up." Pearl paused. She was wrong again. Eliza sat down on the step beside her. The cold came up through the stone, and she did not mind it. "Pearl," she said, "what do you want to be when you grow up?" Pearl considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "A judge," she said, "so I can be the one asking the questions instead of the one waiting for someone else to ask them." Eliza looked at her. "Then you're going to need to learn to read everything," she said. "Not just what they teach you in the schoolhouse. Everything. Contracts, land records, tax assessments, letters that say one thing and mean another." She paused. "Can you do that?" "Yes," Pearl said without hesitation. "Good," Eliza said. She put her arm around Pearl's shoulders briefly, one firm, warm moment, and then she stood up because Nathaniel was coming through the door, and there was still work to do. The work did not stop. It was the thing nobody outside of it understood, that winning a hearing was not an ending but a beginning of a different kind of hard. The council held its first official meeting 2 weeks later in the newly framed schoolhouse at Willow Creek. Walls up, roof in progress, the smell of fresh timber in the cold air. Settlement representatives came from all 11 communities, some who had been chosen by their neighbors with enthusiasm. Some who had been chosen with the careful deliberation of communities that had learned not to get enthusiastic too quickly. Eliza chaired the meeting. She had debated this with herself, whether she should let one of the settlement representatives chair it, whether her visible presence at the head of the room was the right statement or the wrong one. She had talked it through with Ruth. "Chair it," Ruth had said. "You earned that seat. Don't give it away to make other people comfortable. Make them comfortable with you in it." She chaired it. It was 3 hours long and covered road maintenance funding, the midwife retainer terms, the schoolhouse completion schedule, the Agnes Moore situation, which was ongoing, because Agnes Moore had been offered a formal appointment and had her own conditions, which Eliza respected enormously, and a new matter raised by the Sutter's Crossing representative regarding water rights that was going to require the kind of careful, documented investigation that Eliza was now very practiced at conducting. Nathaniel attended. He sat to the side, not at the table. He had offered to sit at the table, and Eliza had said no. "Why not?" he had asked. "Because it's a community council," she had said. "Not an estate meeting. You can be here, you should be here. But the table belongs to them." He had not argued. He had sat to the side, and he had listened for 3 hours, and he had spoken once when directly asked about funding, and he had given the answer and then gone back to listening. Eliza watched him across the room while Tomphus Reeves was making his point about the road drainage, watched the way Nathaniel's eyes moved. The way he was paying attention, not just to the words, but to the people saying them. To what they were not saying as much as what they were. He was learning. It was the most important thing she had ever watched a person do. Spring arrived with the particular generosity that Virginia springs had, sudden and decided. As though the cold had been a long-held breath and the warmth was the exhale. The schoolhouse was finished in March. Agnes Moore moved her 23 students in on a Monday. And by Tuesday, there were 25, because 2 families who had stopped sending their children during the roof-caved years had sent them back. Constance Webb had delivered 4 babies by April. All 4 healthy. Emma Paris cried when she heard about the 4th one, not grief. Just the release of something that had been clenched for a long time. Henry Graves received his written deed amendment in February. His name on the barn. His name on the drainage channels. His name on 3 summers of his family's labor. He read it sitting at his kitchen table with Clara beside him, and then he folded it and put it in the tin box where they kept the things that mattered, and he said, "All right." And Clara said, "All right." And that was enough. That was exactly enough. 1 year after the day Eliza had slammed $480 onto Nathaniel Caldwell's table. He called her into the study. She came in without knocking. She never knocked anymore, and she sat down across from the desk, and she saw the leather pouch. $500, sitting on the desk exactly as it had sat a year ago. Same pouch. She was almost certain it was the same pouch. She looked at it. "What is this?" she said. "An experiment," he said. I want to know what you'd do with it now." She looked at him for a long moment. "The same thing," she said. "Spend $20? Ask first," she said. "Spend whatever the answer requires." She paused. "Probably not 20. I know more broken things now." Something moved through his face that complicated. Layered expression she had come to know as the face he made when he was about to say something real. "I went to Willow Creek this morning," he said. "Before you came." She waited. "I went to the well," he said. "I drew a bucket. I stood there for a while." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought about the first time I stood there. I thought about what I saw then and what I see now. And I thought—" He stopped. "I thought about the fact that everything that has changed in this past year started with a woman who sat on a well rim in November and asked a 9-year-old girl how far she walked. It started with a cracked casing that had been cracked for 8 years, Eliza said. It started with someone who noticed it, he said. When everyone else walked past, she held his gaze. Carefully, Eliza, he said. She recognized the particular weight with which he said her name now had learned. Over 12 months of hearings and notebooks and settlement meetings and hard conversations and 100 small moments of two people trust out of honest materials what it meant when he said it like that. She did not look away. I'm not going to offer you a better life, he said. I know better than to say that to you. You have built your life. It is yours. It is. He paused, and she could see him working for the right word with the care of a man who has learned that words matter, and that the wrong one costs you something you cannot get back. Remarkable. Nathaniels, let me finish, he said. She let him finish. I want to build something with you, he said. Not for you, not around you. With you, the same way you built the council. The same way you sat at that table and said, these are my conditions and I mean them. He paused. I want to be the person who sits beside you at that table. Not above it, not managing it, beside it. He looked at her steadily. If you'll have me. The study was very quiet. Eliza looked at the man across from her. The man who had walked into Willow Creek looking at the world from above and had spent a year learning to look at it from inside. Who had sat to the side of the table for 3 hours and listened. Who had written "Lock your door tonight" and meant something with it that went beyond the words. Who had said, I hope she plays me for the rest of my life in a courthouse in front of Gerald Ashworth and not flinched once. She looked at the leather pouch on the desk. She thought about Pearl saying, I'll be a judge, and she thought about Ruth's hand on her shoulder in the hallway, and she thought about Agnes Moore taking an envelope with both hands and not opening it until she was alone. She thought about a cracked well casing, $17. One right question asked to one right person. She thought about what it meant to do something real. Yes, she said. It was a small word for what it contained. He stood. She stood. And they were very close in the way that people who have spent a year being careful with each other are suddenly close, no distance left that either of them wanted to maintain. One condition, she said. He almost smiled. Of course. Pearl goes to the best school in this county when she's old enough, she said. Real school. Proper education, whatever it cost, he looked at her. Done, he said. Without negotiation. She nodded. He reached out and took her hand, not the firm. Equal handshake of an agreement, but something different. Something that held on, and she let him, and this time she did not let go first. The council met every month. The settlements sent their representatives, and the representatives said what was true, and the decisions were made by the people who lived with the consequences. Which was how it had always ought to have been, and finally, in 11 corners of Caldwell land in Virginia, in the year 1819, was Agnes Moore's school grew. She hired 2 assistants by summer and submitted a formal curriculum proposal to the County Board of Education that was so thorough and so well documented she had learned from the best that the board approved it in one session, which was unprecedented. Constance Webb delivered 16 babies that year. Not one was lost. Henry Graves built a second barn. Thomas Reeves, 62 years old, was elected by Willow Creek as their permanent council representative. which meant he attended meetings at the estate once a month and sat at the table where, 1 year ago, Eliza had slammed $480 down and changed everything. He wore his best coat every time. He said it was out of respect for the occasion. Ruth said it was because he had been waiting 62 years for someone to ask him to sit at a table, and he was not going to be casual about it. Both things were true. Pearl grew 3 inches and read everything she could get her hands on and asked questions that made grown men work to answer them, which was exactly as it should be. And Eliza Whitaker, who had walked into Caldwell Manor with no gloves and no invitation, and the absolute unshakable conviction that $20 spent on the right thing was worth more than $500 spent on the wrong one, built something. Not quietly, not in the background, not as decoration or instrument or useful community liaison. She built it with her name on it, and her judgment, and the full, documented, publicly accountable authority that she had demanded in writing and received and wielded without apology. She built it alongside a man who had finally, at 38, learned the difference between owning land and understanding it, between reading reports and asking questions, between giving money and knowing where it needed to go. She built it in the settlements and the courthouses and the council meetings and the long rides on poor roads that were getting better. Slowly, one repair at a time, and the people on that land who had been walking past cracked wells and rotten bridges and unpaid teachers and unanswered letters for longer than anyone should have had to, they felt it. In the clean water, in the sound of hammers on new wood, in the sight of Constance Webb riding in before the emergency became a loss. In their own names on their own deeds, they felt it the way people feel things that are real. Because it was. Because she had made it so, and no amount of leather pouches or county magistrates or powerful men with 2 lawyers could ever make it otherwise. The story of Eliza Whitaker did not end with a wedding or a courthouse ruling or a council vote. It ended the way all true stories end, not with an ending at all, but with something continuing, something growing, something alive in the world that had not been there before she walked into it and refused to leave till she had fixed what everyone else had walked past. That is what $20 and one right question can do. In the hands of a woman who knows exactly what she is worth, and Eliza Whitaker always knew.